Welcome, FinTech Talkers, to a special edition of the FinTech Talk Show. This is your host, Patty, and our guests today are 5 trend-setting CEOs and a general manager of a large FinTech business, all shaping the next generation of technology. Today, they are not only going to share what they're building and focusing on, but they're going to do some crystal balling for me and for us, and make some bold prognostications on technology and societal and consumer behavior trends. The FinTech Talk Show is about FinTech, artificial intelligence, decentralized finance, Web 3.0, and the metaverse, and how these are fundamentally changing our lives. Tune in to my interviews with the CEOs of unicorns, future unicorns, the disruptors, and the big thinkers, and do subscribe to our newsletter at fintechtalk.substack.com to be always in the know. The best way to support this podcast is by giving it 5 stars on the platform you're listening. This podcast is made possible by the supporters of iValley, a corporate fintech accelerator catalyzing the development of big ideas and innovation in fintech and AI. For this edition, I'd like to recognize 3 of our supporters. Amdocs, with more than 40 years of unparalleled industry expertise, Amdocs is a trusted partner to the world's leading communications and media companies, enabling them to make it amazing for their customers. Jiffy.ai, with their smart platform, they're enabling the autonomous enterprises built on AI and automation. And the Breakthrough Lab. Bank of America's Breakthrough Lab is an impact accelerator program that provides economic opportunity and capital access to Black, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, and other underrepresented minority entrepreneurs. Do you want to hear insights from founders and CEOs of leading AI startups that have raised venture capital on what the future of AI is going to look like, and where are we on the journey to AGI, or artificial general intelligence? Do you want to get a sneak peek on the mega trends that will shape how we live and work in the future? Then stay tuned. My guests today are Jags Kandaswamy, good friend, co-founder and CEO of Latent.AI. They are building technology to deploy AI on the edge and also optimizing deployment of models. Dr. Louis Liu, CEO of EigenTech, a small data AI company with focus on intelligent document processing and a lot of applications in financial services. Sean Austin, CEO of Helios Life Enterprises. Voice Tone Intelligence is one of Sean's company's expertise for Wall Street, a new category of investor insight derived from voice tone of executives. Ahon Sarkar, GM at Helix from Q2. Ahon, welcome back to the show. Helix at Q2, as you know, cloud native core banking purpose built for embedded finance. My good friend, Dr. Riad Hartani, who's an expert in many things from AI to space tech and quantum computing. Steven Ramirez, also a good friend, CEO of BeyondtheArc. It's an expert in customer experience, amongst other things, in financial services. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's start by a quick introduction and your take on 2 to 3 mega trends, in your opinion, that are going to shape 2023 and beyond. On the backside of that, after the introduction, we'll take some of them and explore. Feel free to call out sub-trends for the big trends categories like AI. Why don't we start with you, Riad, and then maybe Sean, Jags, Louis, Ahon, and then Steven. Riad.
Excellent. Thank you, Paddy, for putting this together, and pleasure to meet you all on the Zoom here. I'm Riad. Very briefly, I will start I have a PhD in AI. Actually, I did some work, back then over 2 decades ago on how to combine numerical and symbolic AI, right? And from there, I went on into primarily building startups in Silicon Valley. So I've been involved in few, pretty much all of them in building the internet infrastructure, right? Up till probably 10 years ago, where I jumped more into investing and advisory work with investors on a global scale. So as far as macro trends, there are a number of going on that one can talk about. But I thought I would pick 3 that are close to me at the moment. And for each one of them, probably approach it from the perspective of what are the key questions being answered and what are the key challenges, right? So the first one, since we're talking about AI with a transversal topic here, so I think for me, there are a few things that are sort of on the back of my mind and probably worth discussing. The first one is really, how is AI evolving and how close are we to what we call AGI, so artificial general intelligence, where we get closer to like human models of intelligence and reasoning and all of that, right? So that's one. The second one is, obviously the last 10, 15 years been primarily around machine learning and specifically deep learning. And the key question is, what are we at? Are we hitting limits? What's the room for combining multiple techniques to basically address AI problems, right? And the third one is really more in terms of the impact of some of the new AI innovations popping up over the last 2-3 years in the context of generative AI and content generation with AI, and how it impacts businesses and economies and all of that, right? So that's AI. As far as the second macro trend, for me, it's really, and again, another transversal topic is cybersecurity, and specifically, what are some of the key questions being looked at? And one of them, for me, it's really the key question, which is, with quantum technologies evolving as far as building quantum computers with a higher number of qubits and so on, how close is it to building, to basically breaking, all the public key infrastructure type like algorithms, and that basically opens up the door on sort of a balance, computers with quantum computers to break these algos, and new algorithms that are basically evolving, being developed to overcome that, including algorithms making use of quantum technology like quantum key distribution, right? For me, that's a key question because cybersecurity will be across the board. Then the third one that I wanted to point to is, we're talking fintech, we're talking AI, and the underlying, infra is definitely key. Infra in terms of reaching, people to basically use this application and so on, as far as internet build, right? And for me, as far as internet evolution, probably the most important thing going on at the moment is really this sort of I would call it space 2.0, as far as space internet 2.0, with all the new constellations popping up, right? We know Starlink, we know there are a couple of others. I mean, there are a few. So basically, we're having thousands of satellites at low Earth orbits, at 1,000 kilometers plus minus, and building a new internet infra around that. So there are lots of implications there from the perspective of accessing the internet, new business models, geopolitics, and I think that's another key theme that I would like to basically point to, right? I mean, there are others as far as Web 3.0 and energy consumption and many other things. But for me, this AI, cybersecurity with quantum, internet with space internet will be key themes to look at.
Great. Thanks, Riad. That's pretty broad and good topics. Let's see if we can get to that in the hour. Sean, your 2 to 3 mega trends.
Right. So I had the kind of fortunate luck of life to see the tail end, I think, of web, right? This idea of how we can now pervasively, and I wouldn't call that AI yet, but pervasively connect with everybody to mobile applications. That's something I spend, a lot of my formative years in for software, and have thought about big data since the beginning of apps, right? This explosion of the iPhone, right? And actually having the ability to now mobilely, right, compute and everything like that. So I bring that up because now, to me, the explosion that really OpenAI has driven, right? I call it a little bit of luck, call it marketing, call it, Satya Nadella pumping AI for the last 4 years as a philosophy at Microsoft. So it's not like it's brand new, but it reminds me of what I saw directly with apps, which is this explosion is going to certainly drive investment, adoption, usage. And the way I've categorized it from that entire career is around the interface itself. So conversational UI for me, or natural user interfaces, are locked directly to the underlying infra that's powering it. And right now we're seeing AI power an interface that's as natural as it gets. So, being able to actually now, for instance, like code a website by describing it, right, and have these results come back to you. Google could always give you results as long as Google's been around, but this evolution from, websites 15, 20 years ago to being able to describe it and get it actually coded and delivered, at least sort of kind of now, and getting better. I would just talk about trends. It just totally reeks to me of, which I'm not the only one saying this, reeks to me of it's like the first inning. Like, it's actually happening. It's making it easier. I think it's heavily because people are just so innately able to communicate. And for me, the second trend I would just mention, so I don't eat into the whole time, right, is bias. And my bias is around this layer of understanding communication too. So actually being able to like harness our voice tone, and if you think about it like a trend, magnify who we are. So I get really like dodgy or concerned when I think about this compression of language. It's like sort of, let's go faster and faster and do more and more, kind of like transactional things, or everything that I think has been necessary to lay the groundwork for where we are. I am helping to build it, but I certainly believe the future is trying to make this like magnification of what we do. What we do at Helios is like transparency, being able to have communication enhanced through understanding tone. I think that is a huge trend because I'm not the only one working in voice. There's a whole world of it. Trying to pioneer, I think, a sort of like hybrid mentality to what happens in a world where you're eliminating interfaces and in a way making the technology more and more invisible.
Gotcha. Your first point I really like, and we'll cover both around, are we at a point of inflection, kind of democratization of access to AI and AI infrastructure that usually, if you look at history, that has served kind of where the economic value from a technology is created most, rather than if it's limited to a elite few. So love that point. We'll definitely talk about that. Jags, your mega trends. And a little bit about yourself and what you're building.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. Hey guys, Jags Kandaswamy, co-founder and CEO of Latent. Prior to this, I ran another startup called AutoSense, where we had automated human hearing, listening to sound and then identifying events from it. Sold the company to analog devices, primarily into the predictive maintenance use cases, right? My first foray into AI, and literally we were dragged by the ear to go AI on the edge. Latent.AI is also focused similarly on AI on the edge, but more primarily building it as an infrastructure company. So my three megatrends would be AI, making AI actually work as advertised, making more pilots be production ready, right? Then the second topic is data, right? Not many people talk about this, but data today, the way we've created data is for human consumption. We never intended to create data for the computer to consume, right? So that cycle needs to evolve and to generate, right? So AI will not work without data, and data needs to be in a form for this machines to consume. I see Leo shaking his head, so that'll be another one. Then the third trend for me is, we talk about climate change. We need to have a clear understanding of the carbon footprint of AI, not just training, but also inferences, right? You do training once, and then you do millions and millions of inferences as you go through. How do we get a handle on that? How do we make sure, we're not contributing to a trend that is already out of hand, right? So that would be mine, Patty.
No, thanks, Jags, and love those trends. Definitely want to cover the data one's a new one for me, but I see what you're saying, and it would maybe it'll have effect on the other one too, right? If it's more streamlined, then training and inferences would be easy. So would love to visit. Louis, your mega trends and a little bit about what you're building.
Yeah, I'm Louis Liu, founder and CEO of EigenTech. We are a small data, no code document AI platform. So we transform documents into structured, usable data, or to use Jags's terminology, we take human ingestible data and we transform that translate that into machine readable data, and doing that in an automated fashion. And for me, I think there's sort of three big macro trends I see. The first is what I'm going to call stumbling towards, but not quite get there towards AGI. And what I mean by this is that, I have a PhD in theoretical physics, and I'm actually a strong believer that consciousness has a quantum mechanical underpinning. There's plenty of great recent studies published in journals that there is some quantum mechanical effect on consciousness. I'm not going into that today, but I do think that in order to get to that true AGI, you probably need to have a marriage of quantum and AI, and that's not for today, maybe not even for this decade. But I do think that the prevalence of all of this great work done on large language models, on multimodal models, are really going to cement use cases within AI. And these use cases are probably going to be more boring than you think, right? I was just playing with ChatGPT literally last night in preparation for this call. And I think for a lot of people in the AI space, we're not that impressed, right? On one hand, it's really impressive. On the other hand, you're like, if I type in a query, it's sort of summarizing the top 10 Google search pages in a really nice package, right? Like, and that's one sort of common response. So I do think that there is going to be, in order to find market value and customer value out of all of these AI trends, people will need to start whittling down to specific repeatable business use cases with good unit economics. And the last part is more difficult than you think. So that's sort of one mega trend. I'm going to call it towards AGI, but we'll settle towards usable AI. The second mega trend, I think it's sort of related in the same bucket as what I call, the increased scrutiny about privacy and deglobalization. Right, those are I find deglobalization sad. I feel like I'm a global citizen, but I think that is just a reality of the fact. And I do think that as sovereign nations become more protective of their data, and as individuals become more protective of their data, and we recently saw this lawsuit against sort of Copilot, right? And as corporations become more protective of their data, I think there's going to be much more thoughtfulness going into designing AI products with data sort of governance and data provenance. And I think that's going to be enshrined in both our political situation and what's going to come out of the courts. And you even see consumers becoming increasingly skeptical of large technology and large AI. So that's sort of the second mega trend, both on a political level and a consumer level. And I think on the third major trend I see really is, I think this has been mentioned before, is more around climate, right? It is genuinely around, how are we going to address the uncomfortable question that in a hyper digital world, compute cost is just really, really expensive, right? I mean, at least we're not in the Bitcoin space, but some of those stats about power usage for Bitcoin are sort of insane, right? And I think in the AI world, we also need to think about, as we use larger and larger models, how is that going to impact our footprint? I do think that people will care about this more and more. And a mega theme I call forced climate risk, as in we don't want to think about it, but we're going to be forced to think about it. So those are the three mega trends I see.
No, love it. And love that the connection between quantum, that's something I dabble into, consciousness and quantum, Louis. So definitely that's a topic in itself, and we'll love to have a podcast separately. But who better to do this, who's doing a startup in AI and has a PhD in theoretical physics? So you are the right person to kind of look into this. Ahon, getting into a little bit of fintechy stuff. This was very AI heavy to start, but I know you dabble in AI as well.
Yeah, I'll sit at the in the middle of the Venn diagram between financial services and AI, though I will raise my hand and say that I do not have a PhD in theoretical physics. And so I, like you, listener, will learn along the way. In terms of my three trends, right, I wanted to break them into some things that we're seeing across the realm of finance and fintech and what the implications are going to be on the rest of the economy, some things around how AI is going to interact with that world, and some things around how AI is going to interact with all of us, maybe outside of that world. And for some quick context, for those that didn't listen to the last podcast, my name is Ahon. I lead a business called Helix, and we're one of the largest embedded finance players out in the space. So if you've ever used Credit Karma or Betterment or Acorns or any of those kinds of guys, we power unique banking products for each of them. So my first trend is going to actually relate to what we do as a day-to-day business. But for each of these, I'm going to kind of describe what's the problem that we're trying to deal with, why does it matter, what's the change, and what are the implications, right? So the first one will be infrastructure enabling embedded and interconnected finance, right? What's the problem? Well, if you look back at sort of consumer financial products and even business financial products, they've all by and large been the same. Much of the financial industry is built on this arbitrage of inefficiency. There is a consistent asymmetry of information across the entire economy to the detriment of the individuals. And for a very long time, the consumer has not really been the focus of the financial institution, right? The focus of the financial institution has been on creating loans that generate income that allows the financial institution to exist, and consumers have been a cost of deposits. One of the interesting things that we've started to see over the last 3 to 5 years is infrastructure like Helix allowing companies to build these embedded financial offerings. So now it's not just, hey, you get your cookie cutter checking account. It's how do I take the intrinsics of storing money and moving money and pushing around data, like Jags was talking about a second ago, and embed that inside of my existing application to create something that has never existed before, to create something that in real time can communicate with the other nodes inside of the financial network. And I think the question that it raises is, one, how is that going to change the face of the types of products that we interact with? I think we're at the very beginnings of that, where, yes, you saw neobanks that are effectively just a more consumer-friendly way of looking at finance. But now as you start to see finance overlap with insurance, or finance overlap with broader retail companies, or finance overlap with other non-financial products, and potentially even with AI, starts to become more interesting, right? Because you start to see this world in which you don't have all these random silos. You rather have a connected ecosystem that can talk to each other, where the consumer is sitting at the center of that. It'll also be interesting to see how that changes the way that financial policymaking works. Because today, you're effectively pushing and dispersing funds out into these individual silos, where if you imagine a world where the economy is actually truly interconnected, right, and operating in near real time instead of operating on these legacy 40, 50-year-old systems, you can imagine a world where actually giving people the societal benefits that you want to give, especially as the nature of work changes, which we'll get to in a second, becomes a lot easier and a lot more interesting. So that's the first one, is embedded and interconnected finance changing the face of our financial system. The second is going to go a little bit closer to the center, right, and say AI overlapping with financial services. And that is, and Jags, I'm going to take a little bit of what you were talking about as well with regards to systematic personalization using data, especially in financial services. I think the point that Jags made around data by and large being created for human consumption is by and large true. I think one of the trends we've seen, though, in the technology space is that technology companies have started to leverage this data to get better personalization, right? When every person on this call hops on to Netflix, we're seeing different stuff. When we go and we search something on Amazon, we're seeing different things. And that, to some extent, is like this very first level of personalization. But if you go to financial services, it doesn't look like that, right? If we all walk into a top 10 bank today and we sign up for a product, it will be, I guarantee you, exactly the same. And that's for two reasons. One, because that industry has been built on legacy technology for a while and hasn't taken advantage of the same personalization capabilities that tech has. But two, there's also a complicated regulatory framework around the nature of personalization in financial services as a highly regulated industry. And so as the infrastructure changes, I think we're starting to see companies realize that the secret to engagement, the secret to sustainability, the secret to bringing down fraud actually comes down to personalization, and that there is this potential massive impact on individual financial health, because we exist in this world where the newest generation has less savings than ever before, when they're more cash strapped than they've ever been before. And personalization has the potential to actually help them get closer to where they want to get to, but it also has the potential to inherently discriminate. It also has the potential to put them down the wrong path. And so there's this innate connection with regulation and with responsibility that'll be really interesting to delve into over the next couple of years. So personalization will be the second one. And the third one, and some folks on this call are probably far smarter than I am when it comes to this, but we've even started looking at this inside of Helix as an organization. But is AI changing the nature of engineering, but thereby changing the nature of work? I think we're still at the very early components of this with regards to AI actually being able to holistically build applications. But today you can generate sample code using artificial intelligence, right? And effectively have that run through your QA/QE team to make sure there are no functional errors and start leveraging it. But there are a whole bunch of broader questions that remain unanswered. How do you think about system interconnectivity? How will that interact with and impact regulation? Who owns the data and the code that is created by these artificial systems? But if you draw the trend line through to where it looks like the space is going, as more and more code can be artificially generated, this super high premium on engineering talent will start to change. The nature of a role of an engineer may start to change, right? So it may become more about how do you ask the right questions and how do you make sure that what's coming out is appropriately built, as opposed to how do you design the initial thing from the onset. And seeing that interaction between humans and AI with regards to building that technology will be super interesting. And then seeing the thereby implications on the rest of the future of work will be interesting as well. So those would be my three big three.
Awesome. Embedded, interconnected finance, maybe intelligent finance as an add-on. But that's great. Thanks, Ahon, for that. Steven, last but not least, your take.
Well, I have the fortunate position to go last, so I have a lot of great material to go on here. And I'm going to do just that. So I am the CEO of BeyondtheArc. For over 20 years, we have been focused on customer experience transformation. And a key way that we do that is the kind of the marriage, if you will, between focus on the customer along with customer insights derived from machine learning. And to borrow from Jags, I think our goal really is to make AI actually work. And that's actually what we do in large enterprises. So working in, for example, a top 5 bank, helping them to be able to apply data science and natural language processing to understand customer complaints and be able to identify emerging trends from millions of touch points, from customer service emails to phone transcripts and what have you. So we're driving this implementation of AI. Also working with a large legacy industrial company. You know, it's got 140 years of history making industrial products and now services, related to that. But also to the point, the data that they have was created for managing the business. So they have a lot of data for reports. They have a lot of data for business intelligence graphs and charts, but they don't actually have the data to consume for machine learning and AI, right? And I think that is what BeyondtheArc is about, but I think that that's really what AI is now about. And so I'd say sort of the first trend that I see for AI today is, for the first time in now maybe 40 years of the first discussions of AI, but at least in the last 10, capturing business value from AI becomes a practical reality for companies, right? Like that is doable now. And I think that the key thing, and I think Lewis said, the use cases are going to be boring. It's not going to be exciting stuff, but it is going to be, we're seeing sort of the sub-trends underneath that, back office automation. We've done a lot of querying of government databases to get regulatory filings to be able to identify and extract key facts from regulatory filings. So these are things that are just sort of the practical nuts and bolts. That's what I see sort of evolving kind of on the AI side. I think that also, we do a lot of work, and my vantage point is within financial services. And so I think that we've seen the power of financial services to transform customer experience. And I think that the second major trend there is along the lines of what Ahon was talking about. I'll talk about it in terms of sort of the future of payments and really sort of the fact that the future of payments is today, and it's embedded, and I'll say, and it's real time. Right. And I think that that's the real game changer, is that there's a variety of different use cases. And where we've been focusing from a customer experience perspective is in the impact of real-time payments on improving customers' financial wellness. So what does that mean? And what that really means is the millions of people living, they don't budget well, they're living paycheck to paycheck, they're spending more than they have. And with those extra control of having real-time payments, we think that could really be a significant impact in terms of improving sort of the health and well-being of people generally. And then the last piece I'll mention is around the impact of technology trends on marketing. And so, as you may know, we're sort of moving to a world where online advertisers are not going to be able to track your every move across the internet, right? And so there's going to be that's a fantastic thing for increased privacy. That's a horrible thing for marketing effectiveness, right? So what does that lead to? We think that there's a connection with machine learning and AI and applying machine learning techniques to better understand customer personas, segmentation, and truly sort of like lookalike modeling as an alternative to today's world based on cookies. So we see a lot of impact of AI and technology across not only financial services, but more broadly across the entire customer experience and marketing.
Awesome. Thank you, Steven. On the marketing thing, I just read in preparation for the podcast, I think it was on the Sequoia paper, Sequoia Ventures, that by 2030, they expect influencers and all to be replaced fully by AI, and so that would impact how marketing happens. But overall, I took a lot of notes. Each of the 2-page note, each bullet item is, I think, a show in itself. But we're trying to condense for our audience to kind of get a sneak peek. So I appreciate you guys kind of keeping it to that 2 to 3 mega trends. And one of the things that came out is AGI. And I know a lot of my audience definitely are informed about this, but maybe if we can start with some foundations, right? What is AGI, right? And we could try to define it while we're talking about it. And how do we know, or what traits, right? Is it kind of with consciousness, as Lewis pointed out, or other things, or is generative AI like ChatGPT almost there? So can we have like an open discussion on what is AGI? When will we know that we have it? And then kind of get maybe after that to focus on what Jags and Steven talked about, right? How to make it work as an abstract concept. It's kind of very cool to debate and talk, but in application, economic value that some people bought about. So kind of keep it open. Don't talk over each other, but let's go. Who wants to go first in defining AGI and the traits?
I'll go. I think, one of the first attempts to define AGI was Alan Turey's Turing test, right? Which I think everyone who listens to this podcast would know. If you can't tell the difference between a machine and a human, machine can be considered intelligent. And now actually we see that a lot of these large language models, not just ChatGPT, but many other large language models, come very close to being able to pass the Turing test. But I do not think that they're even close to being sentient or towards AGI. So therefore we really need to find some kind of other functional way of determining what is AGI. And I'm not here to sort of debate about what are those definitions, but I do say that one of the reasons why I think we are still so far away from it is with ChatGPT can generate. I actually just asked it to tell me a story about Luke Skywalker versus Captain Picard and generate something really cool. It sort of made sense. It's unable to hold on to additional context, and it's unable to actually perform that kind of specific logical reasoning. And I think from a general AGI perspective, I think we need to have a broken down list of very specific functional things that an AI needs to do. And I think so we need to probably move away from just being able to be a chatbot to something that's far more sort of cognitive strength based.
Gotcha. Like with context. Others?
I come at this from I'll put a funny angle on it, because I always think to myself, without having decades of experience in this or something, right, is there's so much that computing and then bleeding the edge of, what we're going to say is AI or AGI, that we can't do. So there's countless things machines are now doing all the time that are pushing this boundary of right now you can converse with them, but they're not conversing quite to our level, we think, right? I come at it from the hedge fund world, right? I think, from my background, what we do at Helios is supporting data intelligence through voice tone for hedge funds. Is these machines are now making decisions and have been, like quant hedge funds dominate the space to the tune of 16 billion made last year on decision making from data that is for instance, one data point in of a model that's got 250 500 different disparate data sources to understand the markets in real time and trade on them. So it certainly doesn't directly answer what is the definition of AGI, but I think there is, from my perspective, when I see these, it continually blows my mind, right, for the world of hedge funds that this is already consuming it. So is that AI? Is it general? It's not conversational, but these decisions are hundreds of orders, magnitudes more than anything we could ever do, right? These are infinitely powerful.
Yeah, high impact, making very critical decisions. Yeah, go ahead. Who was trying to get in? Yeah,
so I can think from a different perspective, right? You see, when I look at the whole AI world, you see a lot of these terms. I mean, first of all, don't have a formal definition, but they've been going on for a long time. During my PhD days, like back, in Japan, Berkeley, and a few others, like 20 years plus ago, we had this AGI or equivalent. We have responsible AI, explainable AI, trustworthy AI. So it's the same terms that basically followed us for the last 20, 25 years, right? And probably will keep going. But at the end of the day, I think an abstract definition is really, to try to frame it in terms of problems that human beings can basically solve, right? But I think, see, it's probably better to approach this whole notion from the perspective of what are the key challenges that we see with AI today, right? I would like to go back to maybe the top 3 or 4, really, that I see. And especially over the last, 15, 20 years, right? I think one of them is really the heavy focus on statistical AI, numerical AI. And the big question today, is it hitting a limit, right? Do we need to combine all this deep learning and different ways of doing supervised or even reinforcement learning, and to some extent, maybe unsupervised learning with other things like possibilistic reasoning, probabilistic reasoning, different types of logic that came from from different expert system type techniques. So that for me is key because there is this whole theme which is to get to AGI, we have to basically shift direction and augment the techniques we have today with other ways of approaching AI, right? And I listed some of them. So that's one. A second will be, the cost of doing all of this. Anyone who's done any real, work in AI, basically, will realize that, it is expensive, which basically, lead to the point of, only few can do it. Look at, this whole generative AI, for example, today, you really find 5, 6 key companies, large ones, with all the costs, of the cloud, handled and all of that. And pretty much everyone else will fall behind, right? The third key problem with AI that I see, which plays into the AGI equation, is really, how can AI, deal with things like imprecise data, incomplete data, uncertain data, right? Bias in data, ethics in data. And that's probably the third key problem that one has to address. So for me, defining AGI is mostly from the perspective of addressing these challenges. And the conclusion of that, and I think that's probably a theme overall, is, it's been the case again for 20 years, is, we always overpromise with AI. But, I can say the hard problem that AI did not solve a while back, they're still not solved with AI today, right? So I think one has to put some reality into all this expectation of having basically everything solved with AI within a short time frame and so on. So that's another way to look at it.
Yeah. So kind of a bottoms-up approach of defining AGI, a top-down approach like functional and problem domain. Maybe the magic happens when you do both. Jags, you were trying to get in.
Yeah. So, usually when we compare a machine, we're trying to compare it with the human intelligence, right? So, to give a simple example, when you when you teach a child what a fire is, right? You can show the child a candle or a stove, right? Like a gas stove or something, the fire is burning. The moment they see that, either they touch it or they feel it, and you tell them that's a fire. You don't have to show all instances of fire to the child for them to learn about fire, right? They've learned it, right? They can identify a candle, they can identify a paper burning, they can identify a wood burning, and they know that it is all fire. That's how we learned it, right? As humans, as we grew up, we knew that, and it ingrained in ourselves. If you unpack that, right, there was multiple dimensions to that learning process. For a machine to learn that way, to achieve that, we don't have enough computing power, or we haven't unlocked, as Louis was talking about, that the quantum mechanical aspect that comes with that. I think all of that needs to come together for us to achieve that AGI status. And even when it comes to that, the human intelligence will continue to surpass, continue to improve and increase. The machine will have difficulty catching up because we are the ones that are creating that machine.
Okay,
right?
beautiful.
So,
it's a great point. So is it a representation problem, like you brought up about the data not from machine, or is it just a compute bandwidth problem, or is it a combination?
I would say it's a combination of all and more.
Okay.
Right? We create with what we can imagine. You know, when you put data points together, when you have data that we don't know the connections, the machine is able to identify those connections and come up. It is not beyond our imagination. It is there. It's just that we don't have the computing bandwidth to sit and analyze, because we'll get tired looking for all those patterns. Right? The machine is able to do it easily. Right? So it's a combination of data, the compute power, and our imagination along with that to create that.
Just to sort of summarize this a little bit, and not to get too philosophical here, I think it really is a question around the physics of consciousness, or the physics of creativity. And what I mean by this is that, in theory, right, a language model or some kind of AI model large enough to encompass the entire internet, e.g. GPT-3, GPT-4 maybe coming out, should theoretically have enough emergent properties to be considered intelligent, right? But I don't think it will. So it's not. So is it? So it's like, if I continue adding layers and layers of complexity and data, and I'm still not achieving, AGI, right? And by the way, like GPT-3 has seen way more text and way more data than any human could ever achieve in a lifetime. There's got to be some other, I call it physics, mechanism that enables creativity. True creativity enables true consciousness. And maybe that's quantum, maybe that's something else. But I think there is a question around, is pure statistical emergent properties, is that enough to create AGI? Doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, we need something like Schrodinger's, right, which is more not statistical but definitive. But great point. I love the philosophical aspects.
Well, I would go sort of the other direction and say, it doesn't matter, right? So it doesn't matter that perhaps computers can't think like a human. Well, you know what? There's problems that humans can't solve, and I'll give you two ones that come off the top of my head. Let's look at the predictive maintenance use case, right? None of us here can look at a machine and understand when it's going to break down. We've been doing work in retention and churn. I can't look at customer relationships and know who's going to leave and when. But those are things where the powerful math really can make a difference, right? So there's this idealized view of the promised land of like, oh, we have to get to this AGI level before any of this makes sense. And I think there's tremendous value today and along the way, and we may never even make it to the promised land, but there's still actions we can take now. That's sort of how I view this bigger picture.
I completely agree. I think that most of the use cases that are going to be coming out, that's going to make people a lot of money and have a lot of impact, are going to be really boring, and it's just about sheer computing scale and ability to do complex things in a predictable way.
Gotcha. No, love the discussion. So be it when it happens, or be it when we're tackling problems, as Steven very articulately pointed out, what do you think the form factor will be, right? And is it going to be this behemoth kind of digital intelligence? I was reading that book. If I get the author, I should remember. Or is it kind of these piecemeal, or is it in the edge like Jags is talking about? So what, like the next generation of AGI or whatever trending towards AGI, what do you think the form factor will be?
So I have coined a term called adaptive AI, right? This is something that we coined at Latent.AI, and we've talked about it, and we continue to build around it, right? Today we talk about AI inference being done at the AI at the edge or AI in the cloud, but everybody forgets about the network in between, right? Economists coined this term very famously, right? Like data is the new oil. So with that new oil, I drew a parallel from the oil distillation towers. You guys remember your chemistry lessons from crude oil heating up and going through the distillation tower? So drew a parallel from that and thinking like, instead of treating the network as a dump pipe, the network actually has a lot of computing to offer along the way. How do you define and build the right type of intelligence along that network? So you extract and you use that as a filter to get the right intelligence extracted as the data passes through, and sending only the signals all the way up to wherever it needs to go. We did an example here, right? Like, if you have your doorbell camera today, it's motion sensor activated. Anything that moves in front of it, you get an alert. We did this work with a large telco in the US. We built a human detection model to run on the doorbell on 4-bit processor, a human, non-human detection running at 80 kilobits, AA battery for 2 years, right? Always on. It detects only whether there is a human or not human. Once a human is identified, then you pass that image to the next layer of compute. In this telco's case, it was the MEC environment where you're doing facial recognition. Is that Patty? Is that Jags? Is that Lewis at the door? Do they have permission to enter? Right? You do that because it's a little bit compute intensive. Let's say the face is not identified. You can pass that image up to the next layer of compute. This could be the cloud instance, where you do an analysis of the uniform segmentation and figure out, okay, is that a UPS uniform? Is that a FedEx or an Amazon delivery person at the door? Am I expecting a delivery? Should I open the door? That kind of logic can be run at a little bit more deeper computing power. So Think about this. It is how AI will evolve. There is no binary here. There is no either or. It is all encompassing. And there will be we are working on some oil and gas use cases, right? Undersea, a customer of ours is using a drone submarine to do pipeline inspection, to look for anomalies. Think about the impact to the climate if a pipeline is about to burst and you send in something to record the video, take the video up, put it up onto the cloud, process it. 3 days later, you find out there is some issue and send a diver to go fix it. If the pipe bursts, you're going to face a lot of losses there, right? But with the technology like AI running on the edge, as soon as you detect, you can send in a notification and somebody can immediately go fix that.
Gotcha. Jags, I completely agree with you that the form factor is going to be very layered, right? I mean, we sort of take a very similar approach, right? We process complex documents, right? If you throw a 300-page loan document into ChatGPT or GPT-3, you're going to spend more money on compute power than a cravat lawyer. But the way to do it is that you need to actually segment down using different types of models, from lightweight probabilistic models all the way through to large language models in certain areas, or call a multimodal image recognition model or machine vision model to be able to actually complete these tasks. And I think unit economics suddenly becomes really important. I think it's been estimated that OpenAI spends 60 cents to $1 per query. I mean, if Google did that on its search engines, it would go bankrupt in a day, right? So I think there is definitely about a multi-form form factor when it comes to building these AI applications.
Gotcha. And we should talk about that optimization, but maybe I want to go into use cases a little bit and get Ahon, others also in the discussion. So in my research, I saw obviously there's text to text, especially if you take in ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion, some of the big players or the big movements that are happening, text to image or generating image, text to 3D. There's image to text as well. There are a few flavors of that, right? Contextualizing all that, obviously that has general application, copywriting and sales and marketing or creative writing and that kind of stuff. But let's zoom in on financial services if we can, and see where some of these applications. I know, Jags, you talked about some oil and natural gas. That's a lovely example, right? Especially of the edge ability and huge implications. And Steven, you also talked about some industrial application. So is the application more industrial? What are some of the applications in financial services? Maybe Ahon and Louis, I know you're working with clients there. Maybe you want to start that off on use cases.
For sure. So, I mean, I think we just started by talking about how the form factor is this multi-layered approach. And I think, honestly, use cases are the exact same, where if you look at from every layer down from the individual consumer to the company building for them, to the infrastructure behind the company, to the way that company builds the infrastructure, every layer of that has practical, today, usable use cases for AI. And so what I wanted to do is quickly maybe dive into each of those layers and give one or two examples so you can kind of get an understanding. At the consumer level, and we talked about this a little bit from a megatrends perspective, what are things that AI today is really good at? AI is really good at pattern recognition. AI is really good typically at predictive analytics in a way that humans cannot do. AI, if you give it a framework within which to operate, can be good at things like conversational dynamics. So, Steven, to your customer service aspect of financial services, a lot of tier one customer service can be automated, right? And so when you think about, okay, I am an individual using a financial services product, what are some practical, real use cases for AI? I think there's one suite that will be around AI-based pattern analysis, personalization, and really sort of behavioral nudges, if you will, right? Where today, like we were talking about, millions and millions of people are living paycheck to paycheck. Millions of Americans and people across the globe struggle with savings. People struggle with knowing when to make the right types of financial decisions. And ultimately, if you break down those decisions, they are just a series of understanding the actions that you are taking, what is happening broadly inside of your lives, and to some extent, a predefined set of best practices as agreed upon between you and, let's say, the decision entity, right? And so we're starting to see this, and we have this a customer today that applies AI to help nudge consumers towards the goals that they themselves set, right? Because there's this inherent balance where, as an individual, I don't want a system dictating everything that I do day in, day out. But I do want something that's going to help me get to where I know that I want to go with things that I know that I'm comfortable with. And so I think you'll see one category there at the consumer level. You'll see one category around automating tier one customer service and manual review type activity. So as Louis mentioned, document verification is a part of a standard KYC flow, for example. If you go through the happy path, great. If you don't go through the happy path, now you have to submit your driver's license. Now you have to submit some kind of existing statement that shows where you're from. And as Jags would put it, that data is not yet machine consumable. So do you really want to go pay some rep $5 to $10 to go and read that document? No. Especially if a system like Lewis's companies can go through, read that data, and give it in a way that's easily ingestible and that regulators are comfortable with. And so you'll start to see some of those manual tasks get automated away. And in the context of customer service, typically, and this is kind of shocking, somewhere between 60 to 80% of tier one customer service calls for a lot of financial institutions are stupid basic questions. Like, what's my account balance? Right? When did my last transaction come in? And those are things that are very easy to train chatbots. And even today, if you can go see things like Glio, which we use across the Q2 ecosystem, which are AI-based chatbots, right? That will replace that first tier of service and reserve human interaction for the more complex, more nuanced things that today humans can do that maybe machines cannot. So let's go one level up from the consumer and let's go to, okay, what about the business that's trying to serve that consumer? Well, that business effectively has to figure out, how am I going to help my consumers grow their financial health? And at the same time, how am I going to predict and stop fraud in its tracks? Because fraud can be one of the biggest areas that I'm going to lose money as a business that's powering financial services. Well, you can do that with AI, right? Because AI can effectively analyze patterns and in many cases predict where some of these patterns are going to occur. So you can proactively write rules that will only impact those that would be more likely to enact fraud versus those that would be less likely. Now, there's a regulatory implication there, but I won't dive way too deep. So that's just one example at the sort of company level. You go to the infrastructure level. And as I was talking about, things like, how are you creating new infrastructure? Well, if you can now generate code, and we started doing some basic pilots with this, not necessarily pushing direct into prod, as we're still trying to be careful as to how we leverage it. But what we found is actually in a lot of use cases, you can dramatically speed up the time it takes for you to build something by using something like artificial intelligence to build some basic components like jobs or building out data pipelines internally, as long as you have the appropriate QA and QE procedures and the appropriate controls at every layer of the process. And so the short answer is, those are just some use cases. You go outside of financial services and you'll see those pattern recognition use cases and everything from the oil and gas pipelines that we were talking about to cancer recognition in biology to genetic sort of genome analysis. And I think those use cases are by and large endless, but it comes down to, where is their value in understanding a pattern? Where is their value in being able to predict where something is going, like the hedge fund world, as Sean was talking about a moment ago? And where can those things be done more systematically using pure compute power without requiring some of the quantum mechanical implications that Lewis was talking about a moment ago?
Well,
Awesome.
I think that what anyone will tell you is that it's not about the model, it's about the action that you take with the model. And I think that that's what's really interesting in the financial services side, particularly now when you start talking about new capabilities like in payments, like in embedded banking, right? There's now the ability to have those model insights drive all kinds of actions that weren't possible before. So it really is it's the insights plus new avenues for action.
And the thing that people are going to have to figure out is, how do you explain that to a regulator, right? How does a regulator get comfortable with the systemic way in which you will make actions in a way that is non-discriminatory and non-biased, when in some cases you are generating net new actions based off of inherent logic? And that's where the sort of lag between regulators' understanding and the growth of AI will be interesting, because financial services obviously is so highly regulated.
Right. And that was great, meaning, Ahon, you did a great job, right? The all kind of the buckets of use cases, so to speak, right? The patterns, the prediction, and the contextual kind of, and each will kind of grow. There's a spectrum, right? They're at some current state. They'll grow. If there's anyone wants to add anything.
I just wanted to add this one thing, right? Like based on what Ahon and Steve talked about, AI for me is not artificial intelligence; it's augmented intelligence.
Yes.
It is a tool to help humans make better decisions. That's all. So,
Gotcha.
What an AI produces is never the results, right? It is producing confidence-based scores. It's doing predictions, right? We got to use that as predictions to inform how we make decisions. That's all.
Yeah, so it has broad application to a financial planner, like a wealth manager, a doctor, a physician, and lawyers, right? So it has that aspect can be like even the pilot, right? The GitHub pilot, which is an AI to generate code. I think a developer can use it. It can't just rely on it, but can use it to. I think Ahon, you talked about that earlier, that you're looking into it. So I want to move on. I think it's a good summary, good discussion on use cases. I think, Sean, your bias definitely comes into that pattern bucket, so to speak. And it looks like you've done some cool work at your company around recognizing that in voice tone. That's pretty cool. I'll have to check it out, especially it's so impactful in the hedge fund industry. I want to move on to kind of the optimization side of things, right? So several of you talked about kind of the impact on climate, the carbon footprint, as compute. I think somebody's talked about how much energy it costs. So optimization becomes not just a good thing to do, but it's an imperative for this Cambrian explosion to happen. So I know, Jags, you're kind of working on it, kind of specifically building IP around it. Maybe you can kick us off, and Riad, maybe get you on the conversation. You laid out some things that can be done kind of at the horizontal level, and let's have an open discussion around optimization, carbon footprint, the entire kind of the climate or sustainability of this Cambrian explosion of AI. Jags.
Absolutely, right. So thanks, Patty. The way I did my fundraising, right, my seed round, I took my iPhone out, called Siri, asked for time, and then put the phone on airplane mode, called Siri up and asked for time again. The answer that came back was like, sorry, you're not connected to the internet. So it was a simple query, and the resource that I was looking for was available locally on device, right? And I just showcased, this was 4 years ago, right? 4.5 years ago when I showcased this, saying that, yes, AI is running, it's running in the cloud, and it's costing, the hops that it takes and all the way it goes. So we did an experiment and we came up with this, right? Like every query that you send out using a voice UI to get answers back, the equivalent of a small battery, the coin cell, gets depleted. Think about
that's for every query. That's your estimate.
Every query. Yes.
Wow.
Right? That's phenomenal. And by the way, that was brilliant to use that in your fundraising, right? It makes the case for the Edge AI like nothing else. No better deck than just showing that. But go on, Jags.
So with that, then comes data privacy, right? Privacy becomes an issue, but primarily sending all the data over burns so much power going through, right? And we have noticed that GPUs, where training is one side, you have to use heavy amounts of GPU to train for your model, but then that could be like a one-time large investment, and then you're doing incremental training from there on, which may not be as expensive. But the inference side, people have completely missed on that, and finally they're catching on to that, is that inference is where your expense is going to be, right? This is where your OpEx is going to hit you really, really bad when you're running it on the cloud. And at the same time, there are certain use cases that cannot be done, that cannot be deployed without a form factor that is close, that is optimized and close to the data. This is what we profess and we talk to our customers, is that the ADC, analog to digital conversion, where it happens is closer to the data. And you need AI capabilities closer to that ADC. Right?
Gotcha. Like the defense use cases, oil and natural gas use case comes to mind. Those are, you have to do it on the spot, but keep going. Yeah.
And retail as well, right? So those type of use cases need to happen there. Then you start to think about, okay, if I put it there, what are my implications in terms of, am I getting the right results from this? Am I doing the right things, or am I getting the right predictions? Right? That's where like the customers are like, oh, I want to. The instant reaction would be like, I'm going to sweep all of this back up, and then I can put it into my cloud, and then I can go back to it whenever I want to. Right? We did another analysis, and we interviewed several CIOs and their VP infrastructure and stuff. Right? Like 97% of data collected into the cloud never gets touched ever again.
Wow.
Right? Can you believe that? Right? It's all we are all. What is the famous show where people collect junk and keep it in their houses?
Hoarders.
Never get hoarders, right? We are digital hoarders in the enterprise. Yeah. Right?
Well, I mean, I've said this, like, big data has, sort of, there's been kind of the downside of big data. People sort of the mistaken impression that more data results in better models, right? And it's not more data, it's the right data. And then you just the issues of dealing with the volume of data. It's not a surprise, because it becomes that much, I mean, the difficulty of working with that much data, particularly to build predictive models, huge compute resources, huge energy consumption, and I was just going to add, not once have we just sat down, created, quote unquote, a model and then trained it, right? I mean, we're iterating on lots of different models, lots of different pulls of the data. And Jags, that's all consuming huge, compute and storage resources in the cloud, right? That's hugely energy consuming every step of that prototyping journey.
So no, wonderful, Steven. And so Jags, just to kind of get your kind of button it up a little bit. So the distributed inferencing, basically, so the model that you build on this big data, they need to be optimized or changed or adapted to a edge computing environment, so to speak, and access. So that's kind of, maybe that's some of the IP you are building. Okay, you're nodding. So Riad, besides kind of distributed inferencing, kind of getting this layer with kind of intelligence in the edge, what other techniques are going on in the kind of the AI think tank research communities that are looking at this optimization at large?
Well, the whole question of energy consumption is obviously a huge question, right? I mean, there's a direct correlation between AI and data, and then data and data centers. I've worked on a number of data centers in the last few years. Basically, some of them are in the 150 to 100 megawatt each, right, at scale in multiple countries. You take Ireland, for example. I think I don't have the exact number, but like 15 to 16% of the energy consumption is data center consumption, right? So clearly, the question of how to optimize, energy is key, right? There are three ways to look at it within AI context that I'm seeing today happening, right? The first one is a direct optimization. Basically, you build your data centers more efficient, right? I mean, different type of GPUs and semiconductors and green energy. And that's what the hyperscalers are primarily doing in different parts of the world. That's the first one. The second one is sort of an indirect optimization, where they will compare, how much energy will be using by using these clouds and data centers versus if we were using just like private clouds or different ways of storing the data, compute, and communication, right? The third one is really, playing with the hierarchy, the layering of AI, all this edge and different type of algos on sets of data, different type of inferences. So you see a lot of that too, right? So I think, at the macro level, pretty much any major country in the world today, the big question comes in terms of energy consumption of data centers. Quite a bit of what runs there has to do with AI, or at least storing data or compute and so on. And I think you will see these three directions being taken, right? In order, I think probably the first one, then all this optimization of hierarchy of data centers as the second one, and the third one is mostly indirect optimization that we're seeing. So that's at the macro level. Yeah, I
think that's a good kind of set of advice. But if you have anything else, so say a bank executive is listening, and Ahon, he has advice too, but he can take the advice as well. Has a lot of AI initiatives. Ahon's not in a bank, but kind of serves banks, but he's building infrastructure that's used by the bank. So what should they be aware of if they're kind of spawning off all these AI projects, right? The cost, the energy, obviously you need talent, but what other things should they be kind of looking in or plugging into so that they are aware that this could kind of
I think explode? It goes back to the form factor question you had before, right? You look at the form factor, in my opinion, at least, having seen AI systems for a while, it's pretty much the same type of architectures, but you see, you need compute, you need storage, you need communication, you need many other things. You need cybersecurity, but basically each one of these components is evolving, right? We talked about cybersecurity at the beginning. He has to worry about all these quantum computers coming, breaking standard PKI, right? With RSA and whatever else, right? So he has to worry about that. He has to worry about for example, we talk about communication systems, how they're evolving and how he has to optimize them for his AI use cases. So I think the way to look at it, and at the end of the day, AI basically is a framework really with multiple things within it. And we listed some of them. Each one of them is evolving with its own roadmap. So that CEO or CIO or CFO, he has to basically have a handle on pretty much each one of the components and their evolution to basically have a good handle of its its AI problems over time.
Gotcha. And Sean, to just get you in the conversation and kind of button this thread up and moving on to, I think we have a few more minutes left. I'd like to tackle the cybersecurity in space real quick before we wrap up. So you're taking problems and working in the Wall Street and working with hedge funds and stuff. Has that come up, or you're still at a scale that kind of the consumption and the explosion's not so much of an issue?
Yeah, I'll say two things to answer yours directly. For us as a company, so we don't do a lot of inferences, right? We do a lot of training, and our inferences are on a small set of observations from calls. So we actually don't have really this huge issue, right? Real time. We have a beta product that could do inferences on the fly, which actually one of the reasons we've held back on it is actually what Jag said. There is implications there. So I think from the startup lens, from my lens, that that's sort of a practical answer. Something I would mention, which is now piggybacking off of what everyone just said, is ESG. It's environmental, social, and governance, right, in the space for the hedge funds we work with, and basically anyone buy side. That investment for those companies that are basically elevating and more mature in this either environmental, social, or governance layer to their company, that ties in, I think, directly to the more macro, wider sort of like larger organization conversation we're having, which is, if you're investing in AI, right, certainly costs, like bottom line costs and your operating expenses is there. But if you're intelligent around it, now you're being seen as a leader. That, of course, your costs are controlled, but that now is a bright spot for the company. So we do think about that a lot, because we're asked, is our data a lens into the governance, right? If you understand the CEOs and CFOs' tone and certainty into the future from our data, right, there's a lot of overlap. But I think, yeah, to our conversation, I just add that in, right? Like if you're a CTO and you're very systematic and you're thinking about it from not only your cost but actually your strategy, I mean, it's got to be and is a major advantage to basically what investors see you as, investability.
Gotcha. So we talked quite a bit over an hour about AI. We covered a lot of ground. Obviously, a lot of ground we didn't cover, but I think the group did a great job in tackling all the big moving pieces in AI. Definitely one of the big trends in 2023. But in the introduction, we talked about some others. So let's kind of visit them briefly in the time that we have left. So one of them was kind of cybersecurity and kind of how quantum computing can kind of address that or crack it. I think, Riad, you brought it up. Maybe kind of tackle that. If someone wants to just introduce kind of quantum computing and how that's different from the computing we have.
I can maybe do that very briefly, right? I mean, like in a couple of minutes, right? I mean, quantum physics goes back to Bohr and Planck and Einstein and so on. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, you're dealing with qubits and not bits, right? And, it gives you ways of, doing things with superposition, entanglement. So you can, I mean, conceptually, it's like if you're parallelizing a lot more, right? And through that, you can solve more complex problems versus existing and today's bits-based computing and so on, right? But I think quantum overall, there are three things going on, right? There is the quantum compute within computer with more qubits and more reliability and so on. You have the quantum communication, which shipping information with quantum characteristics, through that, right? And you have quantum security, right? I think obviously the first one is moving quite nicely. The roadmaps of the big companies and startups and so on, we're getting to hundreds of qubits today. So that's happening. Applications are taking time to materialize, because it takes time and because, I think we've been a bit too optimistic and it takes effort and investments and so on, but it's going in that direction. I don't think that's short term as far as having these computers, quantum computers, I mean, doing a lot of what we want to do, right? I think the action is more on the security and cybersecurity. Obviously, it's fundamental, even for AI, and cyber will be very relevant as well. So the key question there is really, when will quantum computers be able to break, classical, encryption with RSA and ECC and AES and all of these algorithms, right? And and there's a theory around Shor's algorithm saying it takes this many qubits to break this encryption with this length of key, right? And that's the fundamental problem, like, that is scaring everyone. There were assumptions as far as how long it will take to break it. And, there are more and more inputs that it may take like a shorter time. Actually, there was a paper out last month that sort of scared pretty much everyone, and the paper's thesis is like, there are ways of like handling qubits in a quantum computer will break this like, existing, cybersecurity, like, way more easily. So I think that's what's driving, basically. You see that government, like US government, for example, I think that's December of last year. I mean, there was an order for all government entities to basically move to quantum resistant, algorithms. I mean, NIST, the standard organization, selected for algorithms, that are supposedly, going to be like resistant and will be used. And then you have the whole theme of like, basically building security with quantum itself, which we call quantum key distribution and quantum number generation. So I think that's an interesting theme because it's multidimensional. It's the compute, it's the security, and it's the communication, right? And yeah. So yeah.
It's if I chain the existential question, right? So we're kind of wondering, when will AI be able to do what humans do, or when they will think and feel and have consciousness, but the computers will. But then quantum introducing kind of a chain link, when will some other computers kind of disrupt what our current computers can do, and how will that change? Obviously, the encryption and it has implications, distributed ledger or blockchain or Bitcoin technology, because that relies on encryption. So obviously a huge impact, or potential huge impact. Others on quantum computing and impact in financial services, do you see that discussions happening? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the first piece of it, Riad was just hitting on, which is, I think you're starting to see proactive protocol changes and things like the NIST cybersecurity protocol, which have become by and large a standard across financial services. You're like, typically when you put on your cybersecurity hat, you're thinking about a defense in depth strategy, right? Where ultimately you are kind of as weak as your weakest layer. And as you think about, okay, what are the implications of quantum computing on the threat to each of these different layers, you kind of have to consider them independently. And I think it's a couple of things, right? One is, how do you proactively start leveraging some of the algorithms which are called quantum resistant, TBD, right? And such that were that threat to appear, you're as prepared as you effectively can be. I think the second part of it, though, just kind of putting your short-term practical hat on, is saying, what is the most profitable piece of this ecosystem to break, right? Because the reality today of quantum computing is much like deep AI. It is extremely expensive, right? And the practical applications today that you're seeing in the market of quantum computing are against very select use cases. And so if you put on your bad actor hat and you say, it is going to be extremely expensive for me to leverage this, at least today, and that will change over time as quantum computing becomes more and more feasible and also more and more at scale. But today, when it is exceptionally expensive, in order for my attack to make sense, the amount that I stand to gain by actually breaking through this system has to be worth the amount that I have to spend to try, right? And so when you're doing an intrinsic systems analysis to say, what parts of my systems might a bad actor be most motivated to break into, you kind of have to put on your bad actor hat and say, what could I maximize to get as much value as possible? And that's where things like cryptocurrency become kind of interesting, right? Because you can argue that there is intrinsic value from some of the most sensitive data that financial institutions hold, like PII. But what is arguably even more valuable than PII is the actual asset, right? And in the context of something like blockchain and Bitcoin, for example, if you can effectively take ownership of a currency which cannot be remitted back to the original person at a large enough scale, there's a fixed amount of return on investment that you can get if you're able to effectively break through those systems. And so, as we think about this from an infrastructure perspective, we kind of ask that question, right, of which of these layers are most susceptible, which of these layers should we be proactive about, and which of these layers are the most valuable? And of course, there are standard requirements for a PCI or SOC 2 compliant entity, et cetera. And those requirements will change as regulators start to understand the potential impact of quantum. But those are just some ways in which we're thinking about it from a sort of practical short to medium term applications perspective.
Gotcha. And I know, Steven, you bought about payments and stuff. Obviously, it has implications on that, but maybe just not yet. It's coming in the horizon. Anything you want to add?
Well, not necessarily from the quantum side. I do think just from the cybersecurity side, that has just become, that's really taken center stage, right? And I think that it really, with every business process now, literally every single one, you have to bring this cybersecurity lens to it. And I think that, on one hand, it's terrifying, what quantum might do. But again, I just think practically speaking, yeah, but you know what? Right now, someone will call an employee at your financial institution, and through social engineering, with a lot less development work, they'll be able to breach those systems, right? So, but I think it's just putting the spotlight on, it really, I think that literally, if you ask what's keeping people up at night, in financial services, it's just the rate of change, relative to cybersecurity.
Yeah. Before we move on to space, any advice? So I have audience of startups as well as executives in financial institutions. So any advice, what they should tune into? It looks like there's a lot of barriers, right? It's not somebody who can build like an app, right? Quantum has a huge barrier for a startup. So any advice for people who kind of want to learn more or evaluate?
Have quantum as your nighttime reading right now. That's where I will stop. Right?
Okay.
I wouldn't spend any time or investment into quantum. As a lighter note to finish the quantum topic, what is the CFO's wet dream about quantum? Right? They expect quantum to help them close their books as quickly as possible.
Good luck with that.
Pretty expensive way to close the books. I'll tell you.
Well, that's good. We need the humor sustained. Let's try to wrap up. I want to get into space internet. I think Riad, you were the one who brought it up. Kind of space 2.0. There's space tourism I've heard about. Obviously, there's space mining, energy harvesting, but the low Earth orbit satellites that are kind of creating a different internet network, that's kind of more at a commercial level. The others are still kind of exploration. I know Elon Musk was famously asked, when will AGI happen? He said 2029. I think he added, I looked at that paper or a blog, and he said that the AGI will be in Mars as well, so implying that there will be Mars colony. So how real is Space 2.0, and it, like we're talking about it as a mega trend, and is the LEO, the internet, alternative internet that the low Earth orbit satellites provide, is that the big use case?
I'll give you my take on that. I'm quite involved with the LEO deployments, for the last few years. First of all, this is the second wave, right? That we're seeing. We've seen one in the 90s, right, where tens of billions of dollars went into LEO and it went nowhere pretty much, right? Or at least not the result one wanted. A number of things happened, the cost of launching, the cost of building satellites, and the need to have the internet pretty much everywhere, right? So that sort of pushed the second wave to move ahead, about 5-6 years ago. So you have a few constellations that are sort of making it real. SpaceX, they probably have more than 3,000 satellites today at, between 500, 700, 800 kilometers. You have Amazon with their constellations launching soon, as a plan. You have OneWeb. You have about 5-6 large ones in thousands of satellites. And you have about 20, 30, focused on IoT, Internet of Things, or voice, that are also launching, right? I think the interesting thing for me here, plus the challenges, right? The interesting thing is, there was a start launching this constellation and doing internet anywhere, or at least trying to push it everywhere, right? Then it's evolving with new players coming in. SpaceX working with T-Mobile to have direct to satellite and having a phone toward this constellation. Apple, iPhone 14, launching with direct communication to a LEO constellation, having a SOS type service and evolving towards that. Same thing with like Qualcomm and Iridium and Google and a few others. So you see this whole congregation of like, big players. I'm talking US here, but the same happening in China and a few other places. And it's sort of like, attempting to change this whole internet connectivity model where space becomes the network, right? So that opens up a lot of interesting questions as far as, how would that basically interface and complement all the 5G and 6G, submarine networks, terrestrial networks. So I think that's the positive thing. Is like the involvement of like a large number of players with like, I'm counting at least $40-50 billion invested the last few years just in that. But then there are the real questions. I mean, the business case, will it work? The geopolitics behind it, because now we're talking space, we're talking almost no regulation, we're talking basically access to any country anywhere. So you have a number of challenges, in terms of would this work? How would countries react? How it will impact like information technology, data center build, edge build, all of that. And I think that's where a lot of the thinking is going at the moment.
Gotcha. You should read history, Christopher Columbus and the colonization or the discovery of the the Americas at that time. Anyone else? This is fascinating, right? Space, the final frontier. Obviously, we're kind of a very tiny piece of it, and we're exploring also a tiny piece. Anyone else on space?
So from space perspective, we do work with DoD and we work with similar interests, right? A lot of activity is going on in space, and from an AI perspective, we are being asked to run AI models, inferencing on birds up there in orbit, right? So you don't have to send as much data down. So there's a lot of interest. The amount of, as was said earlier, right, the number of satellites that are going up is increasing, but also the power of those satellites is also increasing, and the use cases that we see from geospatial intelligence to multispectral modal intelligence is just exploding in space as well, right? So,
gotcha.
It's a very interesting space to continue to observe.
No pun intended. Or pun intended. It is the final frontier, and I think a great use case for edge AI or edge kind of compute, Jags. So that's great that you're in that space. We're coming at the bottom of the hour, so I'd like to wrap up. And before I wrap up, I'd like to go around the table one more time, maybe reverse order with Steven, you starting first. So talk a little bit about what you're focusing on this year and which kind of segment you'd like to connect with, and how people can find you on social media or other places. And then we'll go around.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Patty. I think it's been a great conversation, and I feel like I've been scribbling notes of all the homework and follow up I want to do after after we get off. I think that for me, again, it comes back to being able to drive real AI solutions. And I'm seeing that I'm seeing it very challenged in financial services, to be honest. I think that, even some of my colleagues that work at some of the top banks, they themselves can't get their hands on the data to be able to, to work on models. And so I think that the growth is probably for us is going to come in other areas. We've been working a lot with industrial companies in the electric utility industry. And so just making AI practical is kind of like the watchword for this, for this year. And I'll just say on the natural language processing, ChatGPT, I think that there's obviously it's been impressive what they've done so far, but we'll see if there's more than just hype. If there's really truly use cases and uses that actually right now it's all in the fascination stage. We're experimenting with it. It'll be interesting to see what actually comes to market in terms of real solutions.
Gotcha. Ahon?
Yeah. Like Steven, I'm taking my notes as we're going through this, and it's been a pleasure to be on the podcast. At Helix, the thing that we're focused on is how do we make finance human? And so for 2023, what we're really focused on is how do we create the next generation of unique, human-centric embedded banking products. And realistically, what that breaks into is things like, as Steven said, we built the entire core from scratch in this kind of cloud native multi-tenant environment. So how do we make data available so companies like Stevens and others can use it to build net new things? How do we find the right kinds of companies in verticals outside of pure fintech, like insurance, right? Where we can actually meaningfully impact people's lives by trying to bring things closer together. We're in the pilot for FedNow, which is launching next quarter. And we're building that actually in a core agnostic way. So you can send real-time payments to nodes across the financial ecosystem without necessarily opening an account on Helix. And so we're really excited to see how does that actually bring all of us closer and make it easier for people to start living more sustainable financial lives. And so in terms of the types of folks that we love to talk to, if you're running a company where you have an existing ecosystem, you think there's an opportunity to build something new and actually solve a real problem for your customers, and you want the modern tech stack to do that, I think we're the people to do that with. Or if you just want someone to talk to about how embedded finance is starting to change the space, and you're trying to craft your strategy either as a financial institution or as a non-financial institution, you can hit us up. We'll be happy to help.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ahon. Jags?
Thank you. Anybody in the fintech world, right, running AWS for their AI inferences. We just did a benchmarking exercise paid by AWS, where we showed our model optimization improves inference speed by almost 47%.
Wow.
Right. And cost savings are equivalent to about 33% of what you do for inferencing today. So I'd love to hear in the fintech space if you're doing deep learning inferences on the cloud, not just AWS, but any cloud. We can help in terms of reducing the cost, right? So love to hear from them.
Gotcha. Lewis had to leave because he had a call, but they're doing some very cool stuff. They've raised Series B, and just kind of if you want to check them out at EigenTech on the web and on social media. So Sean, your closing remarks.
So at Helios, we're unlocking 38% of human communication, right, through AI, ML, basically everything we're doing to tap into these important audio conversations. That for us is impactful for anybody who's really analyzing these. So we talk about the world of buy-side traders, potentially investor relations now, even VC firms looking at macro trends, because our voice data at scale can start to give you sort of volatility forecast for the space. So I certainly would like to talk to anybody interested in it, but we're unlocking this, very important channel. A lot of the tools we talked about and pieces are important to us too. And certainly thank you for having me, on the podcast as well. So this was a great conversation, and what I'm, excited to share with my network too.
Yeah, thank you for coming, and thank you everyone for sharing. My priorities are kind of similar. So obviously expanding into the AI domain. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to have the AI focused podcast, but I'm also helping some underrepresented founders kind of amplify their message and what they're building, and also helping them scale their startups. So those are my two priorities, Patty, here at FinTech Talk in iValley. But it was a pleasure. I enjoyed immensely. Hope you enjoyed as well. Thank you for all the listeners. It's a wrap.